A damp survey is the process of inspecting a building to assess the extent and causes of dampness and reporting findings to the client. This is often also known as a single defect inspection. Typically, we will be asked to complete a damp survey if a client notices damp patches or mould on internal walls, although sometimes when people are purchasing a property, dampness might be flagged as an issue either by the mortgage company's valuer or by another surveyor completing a level 2 survey. Most modern buildings are designed to provide a dry internal environment, and as such have been designed in such a way that some building components, such as timber floors, need the internal environment to remain dry so that they do not rot, for example. Dampness in buildings can also encourage mould growth, which can contribute toward or aggravate respiratory conditions such as asthma. In extreme conditions, it can also result in visible condensation moisture developing to internal surfaces, often around windows, but also to walls and ceilings elsewhere. Sadly, in December 2020, a 2-year-old boy died in Rochdale as a result of a severe respiratory condition due to prolonged exposure to mould in his home, as the housing provider had unfortunately not dealt properly with the building defects. This led to the preparation of government guidance for landlords entitled Understanding and Addressing the Health Risks of Damp and Mould in the Home. One thing that is unfortunately very common when dealing with damp issues is that professionals blame the tenant and give guidance which is unrealistic, such as advising that windows are opened regularly in the middle of winter and requiring heating to be left on all day. In my experience, I've never seen a significant damp issue that wasn't materially contributed to by a building issue. The government guidance in part aims to break this culture of tenant blaming. When we inspect for dampness, we first speak to the owner or occupier to ascertain what signs and symptoms they have seen. There will always be an initial reason we have been asked to inspect for dampness. This briefing acts as a starting point for further investigation. Typically, we will use our moisture meter to detect signs of dampness. The moisture meters a professional surveyor uses will normally be much more sophisticated than one you can buy at a reasonable cost from a hardware store. Along with the surveyor's experience and intuition, this can help to create a picture of the true extent of dampness. Often the extent of the dampness goes far beyond that originally reported. Of course, we don't just use a moisture meter to determine whether a building's component is damp. Our surveyors will also consider smells which could indicate long-standing and serious dampness. In many cases, the dampness will also be visible, either through discoloration or through bubbling of plaster. Once the extent of the dampness is known, this allows us to start looking for clues as to the cause of the dampness. This is sometimes where things get a bit tricky. In some instances, dampness can be caused by a single issue, such as running overflow pipes, but often there might be more than one contributing factor, so it is important that all possible causes are considered. When we see dampness in older, perhaps more rundown properties, there could be a raft of contributing factors such as leaking gutters, damaged render, inappropriately detailed render, failed damp-proof courses, clogged cavities, leaking pipes, etc. The building must be inspected intelligently, and as such, the inspection will not just be limited to the area of the dampness itself. The extent of the inspection will be dependent on the exact nature of the dampness, and may differ, for example, if dampness has suddenly appeared. We tend to receive a lot of phone calls after storm events where people suddenly notice new areas of dampness within their homes. Very frequently, in these instances, we find that the dampness could have been avoided by timely maintenance to the building's external envelope. For example, if mortar pointing is worn, this will allow the external brickwork to take in more water than a properly maintained wall, and in this instance, we would recommend repointing. Sometimes repointing alone is sufficient to address the issue. The extent and methodology of reporting will always be agreed with the client at the time of instruction. Sometimes we will discuss the issues on site and report back through a short email, though more commonly we will write a letter report on the issues. If required, we can provide reliance on this report to a third party, such as a mortgage lender. If it makes sense to do so, we might suggest a phased approach addressing the most obvious causes and perhaps deferring more expensive work into the future. A phased approach is only sometimes suitable, and this will depend on the client's exact requirements. For example, if dampness is being treated during a refurbishment, The developer might not want to wait several months for the brickwork to dry out before moving on to the next phase of work. A chartered building surveyor will have refined their skills for inspecting building defects over a number of years and will have a vast knowledge of how buildings are constructed and how they can fail. A chartered building surveyor will also carry professional indemnity insurance, so the advice they are given is always insurance backed. When you have damp on internal walls, it might be tempting to approach a damp proofing contractor in the first instance. Unless you really trust the damp proofing contractor, you should consider whether the damp proofing contractor has the same knowledge and skill as a chartered building surveyor, and more importantly, whether they have a vested interest in selling you more damp treatments than are strictly necessary. Sometimes we find that such contractors will provide a solution which will treat the symptoms but not the cause of the damp, which can often be a far more expensive solution. We can complete damp surveys quite quickly, though this will be dependent on the availability of our surveyors. Sometimes during busy periods, we might ask you to wait for a surveyor to become available, but typically we can come to your property within a week or two of initial contact. If you have noticed damp in your own property and need advice from a chartered building surveyor, Harris & Clarke's team of friendly surveyors can be contacted on 020 8153 1233. A member of the team will discuss your requirements over the telephone and will always issue a fee proposal before starting, so you can understand the cost of the survey in advance. We look forward to discussing your damp issues with you and working with you to make your home comfortable and safe to live in.